On a gray, cold morning, the streets were empty, except for the occasional car passing by. The wind carried the faint smell of wet leaves and something else that neither Daniel nor anyone else could name Daniel, a man in his late 30s with tired eyes and a heart that had seen too much, had just finished walking his son Noah to school and was returning to his small apartment when he noticed a figure huddled near the corner of the building. She was shivering under a thin coat, her hair matted, and eyes red from crying. Her hands gripped something wrapped in a faded blanket. Daniel hesitated for a moment because he had learned long ago that trouble came uninvited. But something about the raw desperation in her eyes pulled him closer, and then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "My baby, please help me." She held the bundle out to him, and Daniel froze, because even though he had faced hardships himself, he had never felt such a wave of helplessness and fear in front of him. The woman explained in broken sentences that she had nowhere to go, that she had been abandoned by the father, and her family had turned her away, and now she could not care for her newborn. She pleaded with Daniel to take the child and promise to keep it safe. And Daniel felt a cold dread in his stomach, because he was a single father, already struggling to raise Noah, and now here was another life relying on him. He looked down at the baby, who stirred slightly as if sensing the tension in the air, and Daniel's mind raced through images of sleepless nights feeding and comforting the child, juggling work responsibilities and keeping Noah from feeling neglected. The woman continued to beg, her words tumbling out in desperation, saying that she could not return home, and that if he refused, she did not know what she would do, and Daniel felt the weight of the decision crushing him as he looked into the tiny face peeking out of the blanket. He wanted to help. He wanted to save this life, but the truth of his own limitations pressed on him like a heavy stone. He swallowed hard and tried to imagine explaining to Noah that another baby would join their home, another person would take their space and attention. Yet something in Daniel's chest twisted as he thought about leaving the child there in the cold streets alone, or taking it to a shelter where who knew what might happen. The woman was crying openly now, and Daniel felt the unbearable urge to comfort her even as he kept his hands firmly on the bundle. She said that she had no other choice, that she trusted him, because he seemed like someone who cared, someone who had a good heart. Daniel's face tightened with sorrow and uncertainty, because he wanted to say yes, he wanted to take the child into his home and protect it with every ounce of strength he had, but the fear of failing both children made his throat dry and his palms sweaty. The silence stretched between them for what felt like hours, and finally Daniel took a step back, his voice low and trembling. "I can't do it." And the woman's eyes widened in disbelief and then filled with more tears. She whispered, "Why not?" And Daniel had no answer, except that he loved his son, and he could not see himself failing anyone again. She sank to her knees, hugging the bundle to her chest, rocking back and forth on the cold concrete, and Daniel felt his heart break, watching her suffer, knowing that saying no would haunt him forever, and he walked away carrying the weight of a choice that would never leave him. Days passed after that morning. Daniel could not forget the woman or the baby. The image of her sobbing in the corner of the street haunted him. He tried to focus on Noah, on work, and on normal routines, but everything seemed hollow. He saw the empty spaces in the playground where he had left his son and thought about how he could have been the one to hold that baby. He wondered where the woman had gone, whether she had found someone else to help, whether the baby was safe or shivering in the cold. He could not sleep some nights, waking up in the middle of the night with his heart racing and visions of the infant crying for warmth. He started questioning himself constantly. Did he make the right choice? Could he have taken the baby and managed both children somehow? He felt guilt pressing on his chest, a heavy, invisible weight that refused to leave him. One afternoon, he went to the corner again, hoping maybe, just maybe, the woman had returned, but there was no sign of her or the baby, just the cold wind and empty streets. The thought of the child alone made Daniel call a friend who worked at a shelter, asking quietly if any mother had come in with a newborn. But the answer was always negative, and Daniel felt more despair with every passing day. He could not tell Noah the full truth because the boy was young and sensitive, and would have asked endless questions that Daniel did not have answers to. And Daniel was caught in a storm of emotion, unable to forget, unable to act. He also remembered flashes of the woman's desperation, her voice pleading with him, and he realized that he could still feel the echo of her fear and helplessness in his own chest. One night, Daniel sat in the living room holding Noah, and the boy asked why the baby was not with them, and Daniel had no answer, and the guilt struck him so sharply that he felt sick. He could feel his son snuggling closer, sensing the tension, and Daniel knew that. His love for his own child was pure, but now intertwined with regret. He thought of the life he could have saved, how easily he could have carried the baby home, tucked it into a crib in the corner of the room, and loved it as fiercely as he loved. Noah Daniel began to see the harsh reality that sometimes doing the right thing was not simple or clear. He thought of all the mornings he could have seen the little eyes looking up at him, and wondered if that bond could have existed. He imagined the woman's journey from the streets to nowhere safe, and how much she must have suffered. Daniel began to feel powerless, watching the days slip by, without knowing if the baby had survived, and he could not shake the image of her small, fragile fingers, curling around nothing in the cold wind, and he thought of how love and responsibility were tangled together in ways he never expected, and how one decision could haunt him endlessly like a shadow in the corners of his life. Months later, Daniel received a call from the hospital. A nurse asked if he was Daniel Thompson, and when he answered yes, she said a baby had been abandoned a few blocks from his apartment. A baby that matched the description he remembered, and Daniel's heart stopped. He rushed to the hospital with Noah in tow, his mind racing with hope, fear, and guilt. His hands shook when he saw the tiny form lying in a crib, fragile and pale but alive. The woman had been found barely conscious by a passerby and had been taken to a clinic, and after her recovery, authorities had searched for a relative to care for the child, and in the meantime, the baby had been placed under temporary care. Daniel looked at the child, and tears welled up in his eyes. He realized that he could not leave without trying to do the right thing. He approached the hospital staff and asked if there was any way he could take care of the baby even temporarily, and they asked about his situation, and after reviewing, they said he could be a foster parent for the child. Daniel felt a complex swirl of relief and sorrow knowing that the child had survived, and that perhaps he could now provide the love that had seemed impossible months ago. At home, Daniel introduced Noah to the baby, carefully explaining in simple words that they had a new little brother. And Noah's eyes widened in wonder, and he reached out his tiny hands to touch the small face, and Daniel watched the two of them together, feeling a deep surge of love and protectiveness that seemed to fill the empty spaces he had felt for months. That night he sat alone holding the baby, feeding and rocking, and he thought about the woman who had begged him in the street, and even though her absence was painful, he hoped that she was safe somewhere, and knew that her child had found a home. Daniel realized that heartbreak and redemption often existed side by side, and he felt the full weight of every decision he had made. But in that moment, he also felt a fragile hope that the future could be different, that love could be shared, and that he could rise to meet a responsibility that had once seemed impossible. As he watched Noah fall asleep beside the baby, he whispered a silent promise to protect them both and never let fear dictate the fate of those who depended on him, and for the first time in months, he felt a quiet sense of peace settling in his chest, knowing that even in heartbreak there was a chance to do the right thing.